Chapter 18. After the unusual meeting with Harrison, Dahlia decided to stay in the penthouse until Gideon got home. She kept thinking about that wild look in Harrison's eyes. He had just appeared out of the woods, naked and looming over her. She supposed being naked was an occupational hazard of being a shifter. It's not like you could run around in jeans and a t-shirt when you had 4 legs and were covered in fur. What does Gideon's wolf look like? She hadn't seen anyone shift yet and she was so curious. A text from Gideon brought her back from her thoughts and dropped her into the present. Something came up that I need to take care of. I'll be late. Help yourself to anything in the apartment and contact Lori if you need anything else. She texted back. Alpha Duty's call. See you when you get here. The next few hours crept by at an infuriatingly slow pace. She had half a mind to summon Gideon from work for another quickie, but didn't want to press her luck too many times, especially if he was in the middle of something important. She dug around Gideon's fridge. There weren't a ton of options that didn't require mass amounts of cooking. She settled on making herself a charcuterie board. After picking through the items, she wrangled up several cheeses, grapes, apples, olives, and some summer sausage. A bottle of white wine called to her and she poured herself a very generous glass. She munched happily on the meat, cheeses, and other bits. The penthouse was glamorous, but it definitely felt lonely without Gideon around. She was so attached to him already. He soothed her, excited her, challenged her. She loved being around him, loved their time together. Love. That thought scared her. This all seemed too good to be true. Like at any minute this handsome, rich alpha could no longer find her entertaining and toss her to the side. Wasn't unheard of. She didn't belong here. She wasn't a leakin. She was a stripper and he was a CEO. Compared to Gideon, she might as well have been trash. But when he looked at her, she didn't feel like trash. She felt like a goddess, like the most gorgeous creature he had ever seen. The way he kissed her defended her. It was something special. Maybe she was just overthinking things. The wine was starting to kick in and relaxation rolled over her like a warm wave. She thought of Christina then. Oh shit. Dahlia was supposed to call her back. She quickly dialed Christina's number, hoping to catch her before her shift. That was a hella long brunch. Christina's voice made Dahlia smile. Sorry, I got distracted. More fivesomes. Dahlia snorted a laugh. It's just a twosome with Gideon. Christina squealed on the other end of the line. Gideon? That is such a rich, hot guy name. Did you know he bought the club? I heard. Dahlia felt the tight fist of guilt wrap around her stomach. How are things going there? Things have been amazing. Wait until you meet the new management. You are going to freak. The joy in Christina's voice was such a relief. Dahlia exhaled the big breath she'd been holding. I am so happy to hear that. I was worried about you guys. Don't be. We're doing great. But we miss you. When are you coming to visit? In the background, Dahlia could hear the laughter and conversations of several girls. Christina must have just gotten to the club. I'll come as soon as I can. She honestly wasn't sure what the future held or when she would make it back to the funhouse, or what she was going to do. About money. Was Gideon really just going to pay for everything from now on? You better, bitch. Everyone say hi to Dahlia. A chorus of girls had Dahlia smiling sadly to herself. I have to go, but have fun with your hot honey and call me when you can. I will. Make that money, girl. Christina giggled. You know I will. Dahlia hung up with a new feeling of contentment. She was thrilled to know the girls were happy and being taken care of. Her talk with Christina had really put her at ease. It was that or the wine. Dahlia plopped down on the couch and gazed out the window. The sun slipped out of sight, and the stars were beginning to shine through the clouds. She curled up, enjoying the quiet, the view, and the peaceful space surrounding her. The soft cushions seemed to mold around her body. A yawn escaped her lips as she cozied up. It had been a long, full day. Her eyelids grew heavy as the sky darkened. Dahlia dreamed of the forest. She wandered around, threading between rows of trees and let the summer sun wash over her. The deeper she went, the more at home she felt. The woods surrounded her in their earthly caress. They spoke in a language that was etched within her soul. They whispered and then warned. Fear caused time to slow down. Dahlia realized between one thick pounding heartbeat and the next that she was not alone. The skies darkened above the Treetops and a sickly scent filled the air. Something moved behind her and she whirled to face it. A crumpled form lay a few feet away. She didn't need to approach to know who it was. Those cold, dead eyes had haunted her since the moment it happened. He had been the first to get a taste of her powers as a celestial. The man had followed her through the woods, tried to take from her. In the severe panic and desperation she had killed him. When she turned around, Creedon had been there watching, waiting. Now she wondered if he had set the whole thing up. Sacrificed one of his own men to test her powers. She had cried that she was a murderer and he had argued that she was powerful and special. He took her in, then once he had gained her trust, he asked her to do the unthinkable. You couldn't resist a chance to guilt yourself over the past. The cold voice came from just behind her and she spun to face him. Creedon stood before her, his skin a mottled grid of burns and decay. His voice was full of amusement when he spoke. I knew you'd come here sooner or later. He reached a blistered hand toward her. The stench of charred meat cloyed at her senses. You can't run again. It's already too late. Gideon's meeting wrapped up and he made his way through the nearly empty complex. He stepped into the elevator, only to have another figure move in beside him. He looked into the familiar eyes of Edgar. Working late? The other alpha mused. You know how it can be. Gideon wondered what Edgar was doing walking around the hallways at this time of night. I do know how it is. And so does Liv. Shit. Gideon knew where this conversation was headed. She is an ideal mate because she was raised by an alpha. She understands the time commitment in her duty as an alpha's wife. Have you gotten to spend any time together? So Liv hadn't told Edgar about the incident with Dahlia in the penthouse. That was unusual. No. I'm afraid I've been preoccupied with my mate. Allow me to set up some time for you to get to know each other. Edgar gave him a grin, but the warmth didn't spread to his eyes. Unfortunately, I don't think the match is going to work out. I've met someone. I never meant to insult your offer, but she's my. Think it over. I know you found a distraction, but think it over. For your sake. For her sake. The elevator dinged and Edgar stepped out. Good night, Alpha. Gideon watched him go as the elevator doors closed again. What a weird interaction. He brushed it off and his anticipation grew throughout the short ride up to the penthouse. Dahlia's sweet little body would be ready and waiting for him. He'd been fantasizing about the things he wanted to do to her all evening. The moment the elevator doors opened, Gideon's wolf lurched to the surface. Was alerting him to danger nearby. He picked up his pace, closing the distance to the door in a few powerful strides. He could hear something now. No. Please no. Gideon. Dahlia's terrified voice echoed through his ribs and slammed into his frantically beating heart. He yanked on the door. The cold metal didn't budge. He pulled again and again. Something was actively fighting against him, forcing him to stay just outside the space where his mate cried out for him. Fuck this. He didn't need a doorknob. Calling on his wolf for help, he worked toward a partial shift, allowing his knife-like claws to shoot dangerously forward. He plunged both hands through the center of the dark wood, punching straight through the door. Shock rippled through him when he retracted his hands and found them filled with thorny green vines. Blood trickled down from his fingertips and dropped to the floor. Something was very wrong. He plunged his hands back in, tearing with his full strength until a hole appeared. Then he dove through, landing in a roll on the floor beyond. His mind reeled at the sight of his apartment. Thickly layered vines coated every inch around him. The green tendrils writhed as he moved deeper inside. He could see her now, curled up on one of the couches. She was asleep. Her small frame shook as she continued to cry out. He lunged forward, ignoring the creeping greenery as it attempted to swallow his feet and ankles, consuming him until he blended into the earth itself. Urgency plowed him forward until he was towering over the couch. Dahlia. He grabbed her shivering shoulders and pulled her upright. Dahlia. Wake up. When her eyes opened, the irises burned like an emerald sun. The light poured outward and he found himself shielding his sight. Avine weeped. Forward, shackling Gideon by the throat. Dahlia. His choked pleas sounded foreign. It's me. She froze, her eyes dimming, recognition taking the place of the madness swirling within just moments before. Gideon. Her weak voice shook and the vine encircling his neck retracted. He pulled her to him, bringing her face to his chest. It was just a dream, he soothed, running a hand through her dark, damp hair. She was silent as he held her. He did his best to ignore the vines constricting around his legs. It wasn't until they rose dangerously close to the tops of his thighs that he said something. Dahlia. He rubbed her back. Can you send away the vines? She gazed up at him, her glittering green eyes bloodshot and swollen. Sorry, she whispered, peering around. They were just trying to protect me. It's never gotten so out of hand before. The vines slowly relinquished their control over the apartment, slinking away and disappearing completely. There were holes in the walls and broken glass all around, not to mention the destroyed door, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. Gideon turned her to face him, his hands resting on her cheeks. Protect you? From what? She chewed at her bottom lip. Gideon rubbed his thumb along the seam of her mouth to stop her. Dahlia, why did you run away that day in the diner? She huffed and tried to wriggle away from him. He tightened his grip, keeping her body and face close to his. She gazed down at the floor before speaking. You said I couldn't leave, that I needed to stay until you figured out who took us from the club. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I couldn't be a captive. Not again. Gideon's insides lit up as a guttural fire burned through him. She had spoken those words before. He took a deep breath and measured his words. He didn't want to scare her away this time. When he spoke next, he made sure it came out in a slow, even tone. What do you mean again? Her breathing picked up. I can't tell you, I can't. He captured her chin, turning it up to face him. Who hurt you, Dahlia? Her eyes filled with fear as she tried to pull away. He kept her chin firmly in his grip. Tell me. He pressed a wave of energy forward. She wasn't a leak-in, but he knew from her body's tense reaction that she could feel the alpha presence. It was years ago. Her eyes darted from left to right, trying to focus on anything but him. I did something bad. He was there. Who was there? Her eyes brimmed with tears. Creedon. His name was Creedon. I didn't know. Went with him. It felt like I had no choice. Gideon felt the force of a freight train slamming into his gut. He tried to remain calm, but his wolf was ravenous, tearing at his insides. You said you did something bad? He softened his hold on her, stroking her cheek as he spoke. Her eyes dropped. I killed someone. She expelled a breath so massive it was as if it had been trapped in there for years. He attacked me. I nearly died. My powers, they came out of nowhere. I had always been a chosen, but in that moment I became a celestial. I didn't know my strength. Her body shook as she choked out the memory. Creedon showed up. He saw the body. He told me I would be safe with him, that he would teach me to control it. He got rid of the body and took me in. She shook her head and he pulled her closer to him. Once he had me, I was trapped. I couldn't leave. I feel so stupid, I should have known. Gideon stroked her hair, keeping her face in the crook of his neck. How did you get out? Her breathing sped up. He could feel the quickening of her pulse beneath him. One day he took me into a different chamber. There were sigils and smoke. She pulled her body closer to him. He gave me a choice. Creedon had been waiting for her in the smoky cave. There were 2 circles of sigils painted on the ground. One held bodies, the other a bed. You will create life, he told Dahlia. Reanimate the corpses of the fallen. I know it is within you to grow. That power can be harnessed, tamed. I've seen you use it on animals. Her throat had felt chalky and dry. She had used it on animals, but it only worked some of the time. She looked at the rotting bodies in front of her. There was no way she would bring those putrid corpses back. I can't. I don't want to. Creedon's grimace quickly turned to a smile. The other option then. Give me life by creating celestials. He pointed to the bed and vomit crawled up her throat and into her mouth. You can't be serious? Creedon slid a cruel hand up her arm. Those are your options. Choose which one you prefer now, though know you will do both in time. The memory made her feel ill again. He wanted more celestials. He tried to make me, to force me. Celestials. That meant Dahlia was. Gideon's insides churned at the idea of his mate being in such a helpless position. I ran, practically ripped up the entire earth to escape that cave, and then I clawed until I reached the surface. She tucked her fingers in her palms as she spoke. Gideon could only imagine the pain she endured. I found someone who specializes in locator spells. She put a block in place shielding me from Creedon. It's how I was able to stay undetected for so long. Should he tell her about Nova? He didn't want to add any more stress to her current emotional state. Perhaps that was a better conversation for another day. How did they find you at the club? She shook her head, a tear spilling over and hurtling down her blotchy cheek. I don't know. The block was in place until today. She pulled back. Those big doe eyes gazed up at him with the wild fear of an animal with jaws at its throat. He was there in my dream. He was looking for me and he felt so real, so close. He said it was already too late. A panic invaded her tone. He'll find me. You aren't safe. I need to run, hide. Gideon stroked her back. You're not going anywhere. I will never ever let him take you again. You're mine, my mate, and nothing will stand between me and your safety. Chapter 20. The next morning came too soon. It was time for the barbecue and Dahlia was less than prepared to be the main attraction as Gideon's arm candy. According to Lori, most of the pack would be there, including the wolves from out of town, which meant creepy Harrison and that horrid Liv. Gideon had to stop by the office to take care of a few things, so Lori was coming to escort Dahlia to the party. Gideon had laid out a short white sundress with yellow sunflowers, along with strappy gold sandals and a soft white sun hat. Dahlia opened the door to find a stunning Lori waiting giddily on the other side. Her pale blonde hair and sparkling blue eyes were so different from Dahlia's darker aesthetic. She smiled and Dahlia felt the weight of the world and any more pre-event anxiety disappear. Oh, you look so beautiful. Are you ready to go, hun? The elevator doors opened with a ding, causing both women to turn and look. Very unexpected, very gorgeous Arya came sauntering over. What's up, bitches? Gideon commanded me to attend the barbecue, but I'm not going sober. She pushed past Dahlia and into the penthouse. Where are you going? Dahlia tilted her head as Arya casually invaded the apartment. I'll show you where Gideon keeps the good stuff.
Arya threw a devilish smile
over her shoulder. Geez, who destroyed the apartment? She looked around at the busted walls and broken glass. Gideon assured Dahlia that a crew would fix the damage while they attended the barbecue. Just redecorating. Dahlia tried to play it off. Arya narrowed her eyes but didn't ask any further questions, probably too worried there was a sex story involved. Dahlia and Lori followed as Arya made her way to a bookcase on the opposite wall of the living area. The Oxford Dictionary set? My brother is so boring. She rolled her eyes and lifted the top of the stack. She pulled a small, unmarked bottle out of the facade of books. Voila! This is homemade apple pie. Moonshine from our Uncle Robert. Gideon tried to tell me it was gone, but I knew that fucker was holding out. What makes it so special? Dahlia stared at the plain-looking bottle. Arya's grin split her face. It's leak-proof. Strong enough to knock a leakin' on their ass. That means you two get teeny-tiny shots. The liquid was poured, and Arya tossed hers back. Lori and Dahlia followed suit, looking less than confident. Holy! The words died in Dahlia's throat as hot liquid burned its way down. It was sweet on her tongue, but the aftertaste was all 9-alarm fire. She coughed and sputtered. Lori handled it moderately better, but her cheeks were red and tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. Arya tossed back one more and smiled. All right, let's fucking do this. The summer festival was even more enchanting than Dahlia had envisioned. Required a short hike up into the mountains behind the complex. The massive trees gave way to a large clearing. Tents with fair games were scattered about. Kids ran giggling as they clutched fluffy pink cotton candy and recently won stuffed animals. Pack members and Mountains End residents mingled over cold beers and fresh lemonade. A stunning array of seasonal local flowers decorated the festival and hung from the tent awnings. The summer heat had them looking a little like limp greens. Dahlia couldn't help but discreetly perk up their beautiful faces and unfurl their slowly shriveling petals. A rush of joy buzzed through her as they were restored to their former beauty. The air rushed out of her as strong arms lifted her off the ground, spinning her around. That dress looks even better than I imagined. Gideon's voice was warm as it rumbled against her ear. She turned to face him and her jaw hit the floor. In place of Gideon's usual business attire, he wore a white linen button-down and powder blue shorts. The sleeves were rolled up, revealing his muscular forearms. She reached up to touch the crisp fabric. "I've never seen you in anything but a suit." "That's not true," he rebutted, leaning down to whisper. "Technically you've seen me naked." "Gideon." She looked around to see if anyone had overhead. He just grinned and planted a deep kiss on her lips. She felt dizzy when he pulled away. A group of soft yellow butterflies fluttered around them. "Have you eaten?" he asked, taking her hand in his. "Nope. Lead the way." The feeling of his hand on hers made her ridiculously giddy. "I need something to settle my stomach after that god-awful moonshine." "Adia." Gideon glared. "Who else?" She giggled. He shook his head, but a smile played at the corner of his lips. She was fairly certain no one else could steal from the Alpha's private stash and get away with it. Dahlia could feel the many appraising gazes as she and Gideon moseyed through the fair hand in hand. He didn't even seem to notice. People acknowledged him with friendly hellos or respectful nods. "Does everyone know you're you?" "No." She peered up at him, waiting for the unspoken question to be answered. "Devilishly good-looking?"
No.
"Incredibly strong and absurdly successful?"
No.
"Wildly talented in the bedroom?" She giggled.
No.
"You know that you're the alpha." She whispered the last word, though the others are all true as well. She waggled her eyebrows at him and he pulled her in for another intoxicating kiss. Most of the residents in Mountain's End are lichens, or their partners are. With that being said, we do still get humans in town to enjoy the restaurants or visit Luna plus Lupin. It's understood by all lichens that their identity is to be kept hidden unless they're positive of the company they keep. They're encouraged to blend in. That made sense. "Holy shit, I'm having a mouthgasm." The familiar voice of Arya floated toward them over the buzz of the crowd. She was standing at the end of the fried food truck with a mountain of steaming fried foods in front of her. Her eyes lit up when she saw Dahlia and Gideon. "Dahlia, you've got to try this." Arya's beautiful face was covered in powdered sugar. She shoved a basket in Dahlia's direction. "Fried Oreos. Looks like you're enjoying yourself," Gideon added with a smirk. "Just be sure to leave some for the rest of the guests." Arya glared at him. "Don't be so dramatic, Gid. If we run out of food you can just buy another truck." She smiled sweetly. "Speaking of which, I think you need to hire them to be parked outside the complex full-time from now on." "I'm not parking a fried food truck outside." The bite of fried Oreo Dahlia had just taken exploded on her tongue. Warm, sweet, salty, truly a miraculous invention. The second bite made her literally moan out loud. The sound didn't go unnoticed by Gideon. His eyes darted down to her mouth, his tongue swiping over his bottom lip. The motion made her thighs rub together. She offered an Oreo up to him. "Hungry?" His eyes raked up and down her body. When he spoke, his voice came out as a gravelly whisper. "Starving. Please, can we go 2 seconds without making everything sexual?"
Arya slammed
down a carton of fried mac and cheese balls. "I need a drink." She stormed off, leaving a trail of demolished fried food containers in her wake. Gideon watched her walk away before turning to Dahlia. "Can I get you a drink?" His eyes still glittered with devious intentions. She ran her fingers up his bare forearm, relishing in the shiver she saw skate through him. "Sure." Gideon kissed the back of her hand before following Arya. Dahlia was brushing a few spare Oreo crumbs off her dress when an unwanted voice entered her space. "Look what the alpha dragged in." She knew it was Liv. From the posh accent, it grated on her nerves like rusted metal. "Liv." She took in the other woman, feeling instantly on guard. "You don't belong here. You should leave before it's too late." The clipped accent slowed and accentuated the last 2 words. Dahlia noticed another woman watching from the distance. Fair blonde hair and icy blue eyes were fixated in her direction. Something stirred inside her. Was there magic nearby? "Didn't you hear me?" Liv's words took on an urgency. "You need to leave. It's not safe for you here." Confusion and worry swirled within Dahlia's gut. "What are you talking about?" The icy blonde moved toward them, quickly taking Liv by the arm and towing her into the crowd. Sadness passed over Liv's soft honey eyes as she stumbled away. "I tried," she whispered, and then they disappeared into the crowd, leaving Dahlia alone and unsure. She gazed over to where Gideon was chatting with a small group. He seemed to sense her and looked up. There was something unreadable in his eyes. She began to make her way toward him but abruptly stopped. Dahlia could feel them before she saw them. The air crackled familiarly and her stomach dropped like a sinking stone. They'd found her. Look at you with the casual attire. Gideon turned to see Aaron sizing him up. He stood, mingling with Arya and Brona. Aaron's head was topped with a ridiculous tan cowboy hat. Look at you. With the ranch hand attire. Aaron grinned. Just getting back to my roots. He tipped the brim of the hat. And a group of nearby girls giggled. Brona gasped. Gideon's wolf stood to attention. He could smell the witches. Emotional state changing. Fear and confusion rolled off of her in palpable waves. What is it? He asked, stepping forward. I thought. Brona looked around. I thought I saw him. Who? Gideon's senses were on high alert now. Creedon's henchman Lark. Where? Arya launched forward, looking frantically around her. Gideon moved to comfort Arya but came to a screeching halt as he scented her body. Chemistry. Excitement. Not fear, not distress, not even the slightest hint of discomfort. Something was very wrong. The rest of the group glanced around, asking Brona questions, speaking to others nearby. Not Gideon. His focus was honed in on Arya. Her mannerisms, the way her breathing increased, the demeanor of her wolf. All of it was off. He stared at her, fury and confusion building within him. He knew she could sense him when she stopped moving. Panic flooded her scent as she slowly spun toward him. Her face paled. Those cerulean eyes, usually such a mirror to his own, held pools of guilt. It spoiled his stomach, and bile burned up his throat. He would have to deal with Arya later. If Lark was around, then safety was the first priority. He looked back to where Dahlia stood, her emerald gaze already on him. She advanced toward him but faltered after a few steps. Terror filled her eyes. Gideon felt a crackle in the air and memories of his previous encounters with the collectors assaulted his mind. 5 figures emerged into a previously vacant space, once again appearing out of thin air. Terror whipped through the crowd like a twisted wind. Each of the decrepit men displayed the telltale signs of dark magic abuse. Pieces of rotten skin, sinew and muscle shone around their collars, sleeves, and any other areas of exposed flesh. The man in the center grinned, his black teeth a stark contrast to the swirling white vacancy of his eyes. Give us the celestial. His voice came out scratchy and harsh. Lance and Leah had come to Gideon's side, flanking him. She's not here, Lance growled out. The collector looked unfazed. He swept his sight over the crowd. Sounds of panic erupted as his glossy orbs passed each terrified person. When his gaze landed on Dahlia, Gideon's heart filled up his throat. The collector gave another of his ghoulish grins. Yes, she is. He was right. A collective gasp resounded from the crowd. Dahlia's posture had taken on a tense stance. She tilted her face to meet his. The look she gave Gideon could have dropped him dead. There was a hardness he had never seen. Without any warning, she raised her hands. A mass of vines shot from beneath Gideon, swallowing him in a writhing embrace. They surged forward, ensnaring every inch of his body. He looked to Dahlia with confusion. Why? She no longer looked at him. She was running. Dahlia was running toward the collectors. The vines tightened around him. She was restraining him so that he couldn't stop her. The realization burned and Gideon roared, ripping his way through the tightly wound vines. Anger fueled his strength as he broke free. He sprinted toward Dahlia. She was mere feet away from the collectors now. He roared again, sending a wave of energy forward, praying it would startle her into stopping. She peered over her shoulder, giving him one last look before a wall exploded from the earth. The barrier was thick and green, nearly 20 feet high. It surrounded Dahlia and the collectors, isolating them within its ivy fortress. He reached the wall, attempting to press his hands through, but it was thicker than he had anticipated and seemingly strengthening with every passing moment. Think, Gideon, think. Up and over. He buried his hands in the walls and recoiled. Tiny pinpricks coated his skin. She had covered the vines in thorns. He growled in frustration. She wanted to see him bleed? So be it. He latched onto the wall again, ignoring the burning sensations and the thorns burying into his fingers. He stretched his reach to its max, feeling his muscles flex and tense each time he pulled himself higher. But the wall seemed to be watching him, adapting to his movements. The thorns grew larger, digging into his skin so deeply he felt as if they would plunge clean out the other side of his hands. He remained undeterred, his only thoughts on Dahlia. His hard work came to an abrupt halt as two thick vines encircled his ankles, forcefully pulling him to the ground. He hit the earth with a disheartening thud. Gideon could hear screaming from the other side of the hedge. Looking up, he saw a collector above the wall. His body was suspended midair by a vine as thick as a tree trunk. Blood poured from the gaping hole in his abdomen, raining down from high above like a summer sun shower. His mouth hung wide, though he'd long ago lost the ability to speak. Fear, true deep gut twisting. Fear shone through the swirling nothingness of his eyes, and then he was gone. Yanked swiftly back down behind the wall, the screaming continued. It drove a primal instinct deep within his being. Gideon's wolf howled and a new plan took root. He allowed his hands into a partial shift. Razor-sharp claws protruded, surrounded by coarse brown fur. He drove the claws deep into the wall. Collectors continued to rise above the hedge, the thick vines carrying their near corpses to the sky before plunging them to their true death. One vine grew so large that a collector's body burst completely in half. The remains dropped to the ground with audibly wet sounds. Gideon forced himself farther, deeper into the wall. Seeing light through the leaves now, he knew he was close. Just as quickly as the screams had started, they stopped. Seemed everyone in the crowd was holding their breath, waiting for the terror to strike again. The substantial wall of ivy quivered within Gideon's claws and began unraveling. The mass of green fell to the earth, a slow, sad hiss emanating from its withering form, before slowly slithering its way back into the dirt. Gideon's vision cleared and he finally saw his mate. Dahlia sat on the other side. Her head hung sadly, her body unmoving. Dead end. Bisected collectors littered the space. Smaller vines wrapped around the fleshy pieces, slowly dragging them into the earth, their final resting place. He went to her, ignoring the blood splashing around his shoes, and dropped to his knees, cupping her face in both hands. When she finally looked at him, something inside his heart broke, the deep sadness radiating off of her made his wolf howl remorsefully within. She looked around at the gathered crowd. He followed her gaze. Parents clutched their children. People took startled steps back when she made eye contact. She drew in a slow breath. They think I'm a monster, she sighed, and the tears began to fall. Maybe I am. Gideon drew her into his lap. Shoo, no one thinks that. He held her as she cried silently into his chest. He looked at the carnage around him, a lump forming in his throat. She really was a celestial. This complicated everything. Gideon knew what had to be done. He would need the help of someone who could teleport. He needed to make a call. Chapter 21. Dahlia sat on a couch in the corner of Gideon's office. She clutched one of his button-ups tightly around her. It helped to block out the bloodstains, ruining her sunflower dress. Crimson had invaded the soft, white areas. The dress was soiled, ruined, never going to be the same, just like her life. Her mind drifted back to the summer festival. She had felt fear when the collectors appeared, but that fear paled in comparison to the terror she felt when he had uttered those words. He was right. She's here. Creedon. She had known at that moment that they couldn't escape, couldn't be allowed to tell Creedon he was right. The instinct to survive and protect what she loved gave her strength, power, and a homicidal rage. The word love caused her heart to flip. She was more than just pretty flowers and ivy walls. Would he still love her after he saw what she could do? The side of her that could impale bodies and entombed people in vines. The side of her magic that murdered and maimed. Shame trickled through her. She stuffed the thought away and turned her attention back to the attack. Dismantling the collectors had been the easy part. Keeping Gideon away had been much harder. She didn't want anything to happen to him, and more than that, she didn't want him to see her. The true power she possessed. The ability to destroy so easily. If she had known how to control her powers back, then she never would have been trapped with Creedon in the first place. The door to the office opened and Gideon sauntered in. His face lit up when he saw her. The next to enter was a tall, dark-haired man who had broody lichen written all over him. Jet black hair accompanied unusual fiery eyes. The man locked gazes with her before turning to usher the third member of the group inside. Stunning silver hair was the first thing to catch Dahlia's eye. Unique gray-green eyes settled in her direction. The woman smiled warmly. This must be Nova. It wasn't until she made her way closer that Dahlia noticed her stomach. Nova was pregnant, very pregnant. She waddled closer with the dark-haired man tight by her side. Dahlia, I'd like you to meet Darren. He's my head of security for the complex. The man was dangerously good-looking. He had a dark, unkempt look. His smile was friendly, but his eyes held a warning. She could sense it in the tense muscles beneath the arm he casually draped across the woman's shoulder. And this is his wife, Nova. She's a celestial like you. Dahlia regarded the couple. I've heard good things. Arya talks about you a lot. She didn't mention you were pregnant, only that you guys were away on a mission. Congratulations. Nova beamed up at her husband. Arya doesn't know yet. No one knows except Gideon, Leah, and Lance. And Romani, Darren added. His voice was confident and deep. Gideon took a seat next to Dahlia. When Darren told me Nova was pregnant, we took precautions. With the attack of the collectors being so recent, we didn't want to risk anyone finding out about the child. So I sent them away on a mission and had Romani teleport them to a new location every few weeks. Darren moved Nova toward the other couch, but eyed Dahlia cautiously. Gideon had obviously told them about the incident at the summer fair. Why else would he have brought them back? Darren must have been afraid she was a danger to his wife. The thought fueled her growing guilty conscience, and she drew herself inward. Gideon laced his long fingers with hers and gazed down at her with worry in his sapphire eyes. I thought you and Nova could talk. Maybe she can help you understand your gifts more. His voice softened as he ran a hand along her cheek. Maybe she can understand what you're going through. Dahlia looked up to find Nova's misty eyes trained on her. She saw so much in those eyes. Understanding, concern, sadness, compassion. Dahlia gave Gideon's hand a squeeze. I would like that. Gideon let out a long breath, seeming relieved, and gave her a bright smile. The door opened and Leah entered. Her dark gaze settled on Gideon. His smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. He leaned in and gave Dahlia a soft kiss. I'm glad to hear that. I need to take care of something. I'll come back as soon as I can. He stood to leave and Dahlia watched him stride out. His posture had tensed, but his voice remained light as he turned back toward them. You're in good hands. I trust these two with my life. And then he was gone. A quiet heaviness settled over the room. Nova scooted toward the edge of the couch, moving in closer to take Dahlia's hands. Darren moved too. His eyes began to glow. It was a subtle change, but even if she hadn't seen it, she would have sensed it. Her magic swirled as he got closer. His wolf didn't trust her, and it was putting them both on edge. Honey, Nova placed a hand on Darren's chest. Why don't you give us some space? When he didn't respond or leave, Nova's eyes began to dance. A light blue flicker emanated from within. I could just build a wall of ice around her and block you out completely. She lifted a hand in the air and shimmering blue shards of ice began to glisten in her palm. She allowed them to grow in size, glaring up at the stubborn lichen. Darren sighed and stood gracefully up. I'll be over here if you need anything. That honey stare locked in on Dahlia once more before he moved away. Nova rolled her eyes. Now that I'm pregnant, his protective instincts are on overdrive. She rubbed a hand across her round belly. I can barely get to the bathroom without him fussing over me and making sure I'm safe. She huffed, but Dahlia could see the small smile at the corner of her full lips. Nova looked across the room at Darren. Dahlia could feel the electricity between them. The deep connection, passion, lust, love. She wondered if it felt that way to others when she and Gideon were together. Nova reached back out, taking Dahlia's hands in her own. Nova's skin was both cold and hot at the same time, and her fingers were soft like velvet. Now, Nova gave her a gentle smile. Tell me everything. Gideon felt heavy, like his legs were coated in tar. Each step threatened to stick him to the floor and prevent him from moving forward. The day had taken so many unexpected turns. He knew Dahlia had powers, and she had told him. Creedon called her a celestial, but seeing her in action was something else entirely. The ferocity of her attacks, the level of raw power that surged out of her had surprised him. She skewered those collectors and left a scene of slaughter that commanded the respect of even his wolf. He loved her. She was his mate. He would love her no matter what she did. Her bloodlust and destruction today wasn't what was making his gut work itself into knots. It was Arya. He and Arya had always been close. Their relationship had been more like twins. For most of their life, they didn't keep secrets from each other. But Gideon had seen something today that caused all the worrisome pieces to fall into place. Arya's strange behavior after being kidnapped by the collectors. Her refusal to tell them anything useful. Her disappearances for days at a time. He had been so wrapped up in his own problems that he failed to recognize how extreme the change in her was. But he saw it now and knew the culprit. Lark. A wave of nausea rolled through his stomach as he remembered the excited expression on her face when Brona thought she had spotted Lark at the fair. Bile rose in his throat at the thought of that criminal getting anywhere near his baby sister. He didn't want to do this. Everything in him recoiled at the idea. But he had no other choice. Arya caught his eye as she walked down the hallway and hurried in his direction. Okay, that was intense. How is Dahlia? She'll be all right. Arya let out an appreciative whistle. Did you know she could do that? Gideon pulled Arya close for a hug. Oh. She was obviously surprised by his show of affection, but quickly melted into his hold. He breathed deeply, inhaling her
Familiar scent.
No matter how old she got, she would always be his baby sister. And he would do anything to keep her safe. She wasn't going to like this next part, but it was for her own good. You're leaving. He kept his voice steady, though his heart beat savagely against his chest. Arya pulled away from him. She gave a surprised look before laughing. What? I'm not leaving. He stared down at her, knowing his wolf was moving to the surface and doing nothing to stop it. Arya began to shrink away from him. This whole situation stunk of betrayal. He didn't have to know exactly what was going on to know it. Had to stop here. Yes, you are. Gideon spotted Leah quietly making her way to stand behind. Arya. We'll be facilitating a pack exchange. Our member Jessie will be trading places with a wolf from one of the Scotland packs. You will be going with them to help transition our member to their new pack and then bring back the Scottish member who will be joining ours. Arya's blue eyes simmered. What the fuck, Gid? I'm not going to fucking Scotland. Are you out of your mind? You'll go to Scotland and you will stay out of trouble. I obviously can't trust you here. You've given me no choice. Arya pushed at his chest and stomped. Trust? What the fuck are you talking about? I have never broken your trust. Gideon's snarl tore free from his chest as anger bubbled beneath his calm facade. What happened when you were taken? Arya's mouth pressed tight and he could feel anger fuming off of her. Nothing. It was a lie. He could smell it on her and it crushed the last bit of hope he had been holding on to. You're leaving. And he will never find you again. Arya's eyes doubled in size and all of Gideon's suspicions were confirmed. He cut his gaze toward Leah. We're ready for Romani. What? I'm not leaving. I don't have my stuff. I need time. Gideon. Enough. He shot out a wave of power and Arya flinched. Leah has already packed for you. You will be leaving now. Tears filled those blue eyes. They looked just like his, just like their mother's. Romani approached with Jessie in tow. Leah dropped a duffel bag on the floor next to him. Arya's gaze flicked between Romani and Gideon. Please. Her voice turned desperate. Don't send me away. Please. The well of tears poured forward. Gideon's heart felt like it was filled with needles, each one digging deeper beneath his flesh as he watched his sister cry. It's for your own good, Arya. I'll do anything to keep you safe, even if I have to keep you safe from yourself this time. Arya's crying slowed and desperation transformed into a cold hardness. She spun toward Romani, marching until she picked up the oversized bag. She whipped her head around to face Gideon. I hate you, she ground out through clenched teeth. The venom behind her words stung and the ache deepened in his chest. Gideon nodded at Romani and the three shimmered out of sight. Leah approached Gideon cautiously. You're sure? Her fierce dark brows were pulled together. Gideon nodded. When he told her about Arya she hadn't questioned it. She was loyal and smart and a damn good fighter. But now he could sense conflict within her. I'm sure. Her eyes all but told me. I don't know what that sicko wants from her, but he won't be able to find her now. Is everything in place? Leah swept her long dark hair over her shoulder. Yes. Matlina will set the mental block in place for Romani, you and me. She said we can expect a pretty bad headache, but it will pass. If someone wants to get Aria's location out of us, they'll have to work pretty damn hard for it. Good. Gideon's fist tightened. I don't know what powers Lark has up his sleeve, but he will not get my sister. I hear you. We'll keep her safe. Leah's jaw clenched. But are you sure you still want to go through with tonight? After everything that happened today? You know you could put it off, she won't know. Tonight. His finality left no room for further questions. Leah was never fazed by his attitude. All right. I'll make sure everything's ready. She gave him a loyal smile. Gideon's stomach tightened in anticipation. It was really happening. One of the most important nights of his life was just hours away. He prayed to the moon that things would remain relatively calm until Chapter 30. Gideon watched Dahlia's wolf burst forward. He didn't have time to admire her animal's beauty and strength. We've got to move before that thing wipes us all out. Leah cuffed Gideon's shoulder, urging him on. He gave Dahlia's wolf a quick stroke behind the ear. Stay safe and out of trouble. And don't underestimate your power. The wolf shook before darting away. Gideon cringed as she went. He wanted to lock her away in the complex to make sure she stayed safe, but he knew they needed her help. The pack was already going into this short-handed. He just had to trust that she and the baby would stay safe. Lance. Here, Alpha. The beta's toffee eyes glowed. Send Lori to the medical wing to help with Nova. Darren will keep her safe. Then find Lucas and split up. Locate the Aegis and kill him. Dahlia and Nova need their full strength. The Aegis's death would sever ties from the rune. Burned into their arms, right, Brona? The chosen witch nodded. It should. Nova screamed and Gideon tore his gaze back toward her. The lichens hadn't made it inside the building. A group of collectors surrounded them. Gideon felt torn, unsure where to focus his energies. We got this, Alpha. You go fight that big fucker. Peyton grinned at him briefly before his tattooed and pierced skin gave way to dark fur. Peyton's wolf bounded toward the group guarding Nova, and Gideon felt some relief. Aaron, you come with us. It will be up to you to defend Brona and keep her nearby while she works on breaking the Dogger's chains. A shockwave of energy plunged across the grass as the wards failed completely. The remaining collectors that hadn't accessed weak spots in the magical barrier streamed in. From all sides, the Dogger slid into view, its dark gaze falling on Gideon. Gideon, Leah, and Aaron moved forward, keeping Brona tucked behind them. Don't let it touch you. Leah's black eyes were glowing now. Aaron let out a humorless laugh. How the fuck do we kill something we can't touch? Gideon could understand how the man was feeling. None of them had never faced anything like the creature moving toward them, except maybe Leah. His suspicions were confirmed when she spoke again. We free it first. Doggers are vengeful. It won't be happy with the fact that Creedon overtook its mind. At least then its targets will be indiscriminate. And with any luck, it will turn on Creedon himself. Plus I can't return him to the Veil while he's shackled, and maybe not at all without Romani. Gideon was really regretting his decision to send Romani to watch over Arya. They had cut communication to keep her safe. Gideon would need Matlina, the witch who helped him with the spell, to remove it before they could contact Romani or Arya again. Unusual things were happening all around them. A great wind twisted the trees. As the collector swirled his hands in the air, two others were flapping their arms, sending waves of energy quaking out around them. The space illuminated as light flashed from the palms of another man. Creedon found himself some new chosen, Leah mused. Where does he find these idiots? Aaron asked as he clotheslined a collector that tried to move in on the group from the side. The man's legs flew in the air before his back slammed to the ground. Aaron didn't bother to finish the job as another wolf dove in. Its soft red muzzle tore into the side of the collector's head as he screamed. The pack had been quick to choose their forms. Many were still human, but a large number had shifted into their wolves to fight. The Dogger drew ever nearer. How close do you need to be? Gideon looked back at Brona. The redhead was a chosen, not a leakin, and was struggling to keep up with their sprinting pace. As close as you can get me. I need to read the runes, she panted out. The dogger's path was marked by a trail of black lifeless earth. Its wispy dark tendrils writhed around its body. Gideon swallowed his nerves back as they approached. And then they were on it. Gideon dove beneath the first wave of death tendrils. And they shot toward him like whips. He moved around behind the creature, settling himself on one side. Leah planted herself opposite of him. Brona moved in between them with Aaron close by her side. The creature must have sensed the magic in the chosen witch. It lashed out, sending a dark cloud of death rolling her way. Whoa! Aaron dove into Brona, knocking her to the ground before rolling them both clear of the danger. Scorched earth was all that remained of the place where they had previously stood. Hey! Leah called out, wrenching the monster's attention toward her. Lashed out and she rolled just out of reach. The dogger released a tortured roar of rage. Gideon mimicked Leah, snatching the creature's attention away before diving to safety. How much longer? Gideon snapped toward Brona. I'm going as fast as I can. Brona's hands were interlacing in rapid, intricate patterns. Aaron was tasked with moving them to safety. Their bodies became one as he pulled her into him and rolled, shifted, and dodged each close blow. Is it just me, or is this thing getting smarter? Aaron nodded in the direction of the dogger just as Gideon cleared it. Aaron was right. It had begun anticipating their moves. Each diversion drew them closer and closer to being touched. Gideon moved to distract it, and even though the creature turned to face him yet again, it was a diversion. This time he faced Gideon fully, before launching an unexpected attack toward Aaron and Brona behind him. Aaron stumbled, clearly unprepared for the surprise attack. Gideon seemed to move in slow motion as the tendril rocketed toward the two. He ran forward, knowing he would never reach the two in time, but giving it his all anyways. Moments before impact, Leah appeared in front of them. The smoke struck her hard in the chest and she rocked unsteadily on her feet. A tendril wrapped around her neck as her feet left the ground. Brona screamed as she watched Leah's death. Gideon prepared for the worst, fear and fury clawing up his insides as the dogger took her in its deathly hold. But then Leah didn't die. Her skin didn't even darken where the monster held her. Confusion trickled through him as Leah began to shift. Her wolf ripped outward, black eyes glowing brightly. The creature dropped the animal to the ground as if it were poison. An inky cloud swirled around Leah's wolf, and the air vibrated with a severe intensity. Fucking hell! Gideon heard Aaron cry out. She's a reaper. Reaper. Gideon had known about Leah's time before the Ulrich pack, but had never pried. Just like the rest of them, Leah had things she wasn't proud of in her past. He had accepted her and had come to trust her with his life. Her history was just that, history. But as the swarm of collectors and lichens looked on in horror, he knew there would have to be some explaining in the coming days. Leah's wolf encircled the dogger, corralling it until she controlled its every movement like a sheepdog with its flock. I got it! Brona cried out as gold pulsed from her fingertips. The magic buried itself into the dogger's wrists and the chains dropped to the ground. The creature convulsed and released an anguished scream before sweeping its dark gaze over the crowd. Gideon knew when the creature had located Creedon. It bellowed and roared. Gideon followed its line of sight. The dogger moved faster than Gideon expected, crashing through the others in its path and heading straight for Creedon. Gideon's heart seized in his chest as the scene unfolded before him. Dahlia's wolf was there, greenery spilling from around its paws. He sprinted to get by her side, but a mass of collectors descended on him. He fought savagely, needing to get to Dahlia, to protect her from the dogger and Creedon. Pain split his side as something sharp and hot buried between his ribs. He snapped the arm of the collector, thrusting the painful metal into his flesh, then pulled the jagged shard out and plunged it into the screaming man's face. He battled both physical and magical assaults, roaring in frustration as the path to his mate was blocked over and over again. He snapped the neck of the last collector that stood in his way and shot his eyes back to Dahlia. Lucas stood near her, his hand drawing back from the body of a collector. A sharp pulse ricocheted through the air and Lucas's head snapped backward. The cracking of his neck resounded from across the field. His arms fell to his sides before his body went limp and collapsed to the Earth. Dahlia's paws had moved of their own accord seconds after Gideon had shifted her. Nova was screaming behind her. The poor celestial clutched her stomach as a group of lichens fought around her. Lori sat by Nova's side and held her. She needed to get inside the building so that she could receive proper medical care. The only way Dahlia was getting off this field was if Creedon was dead. I hope you're hungry, she thought, and her wolf licked its lips. Gideon had fled to take care of the dogger, and she set her sights on Creedon. His body was turned toward her, though she couldn't see his face. Her wolf was fast and it easily closed the distance between them. Dahlia thought about her magic as her wolf sprinted. She could feel it swirling within, mixing with her wolf's blood, invading every limb. She reached Creedon and sailed above his head. He let out a cackle as he reached a hand in the air to stop her. When the vine ripped through the earth and snagged his wrist, his cackling fell silent. Her wolf let out a satisfied howl. He clearly hadn't expected her to be able to call upon her magic in wolf form. Truthfully, she hadn't been completely certain she could do it. Whatever Brona had done to her released a block in her mind. She circled Creedon, ensnaring his legs in vines as she ran. He jerked backward and his hood fell free from his face. Bile rolled through her as she got her first real look at him. Burns marred every inch of his flesh. Unholy craters pocketed the skin of his forehead and cheeks. A grotesque mouth sat lipless above his teeth. The divide between his face and neck had become nothing but layers of meaty tendons that pulled taut through the thin skin. Blistered scars moved over his throat as he swallowed. So he hadn't escaped Nova's attack unscathed that day in the caves. That gave her a spark of satisfaction, and she knew Nova would be happy to hear it as well. Fear for Nova and her child sent renewed determination racing through her. Dahlia worked to increase the intensity of the vines, but the residual energy from the mark was slowing her down, and there was still a bit of a disconnect. When she called upon her powers in this form, a biting wind ripped outward from Creedon and the vines flew free. Foolish girl. Even with a new wolf, your powers are no match for mine. Dahlia's wolf whined in frustration. A flurry of activity caught her attention. Lucas was moving closer, taking down collector after collector. Along his path, Dahlia noticed Creedon shifting his glance back and forth between Lucas and a hooded figure he was approaching. The man's arms peeked out from beneath his robe as he conjured. The rune from Dahlia's arm was there, along with a dozen others. All similar, all burned into the skin. The Aegis. Dahlia's wolf bolted for the man and Creedon screamed after her. She felt his pull, a power that slammed her into the ground and began dragging her backward. A feeling of powerlessness hollowed out in her chest and she choked on the fear as she was pulled ever closer to him. And then it was gone. She looked behind her to find Creedon face to face with the dogger. The massive monster was sending a barrage of dark tentacle-like arms flooding in Creedon's direction. Creedon jerked, falling to the side as he stumbled clumsily away. She turned back toward the Aegis. Leaping through the air, she latched onto one of his arms. The man screamed but threw her off with a pulse of hot energy. Heat seared through her veins and the scent of burnt fur filled her nostrils. Nova's wails of agony continued to echo across the melee. Dahlia got back to her feet, head spinning with the after-effects of the blast. She temporarily saw two Aegises swimming across her smoky sight. A new figure emerged through the haze. Blonde hair and broad shoulders went tumbling into the Aegis. As her vision slowly returned to normal, she was able to identify Lucas. The Lycan punched a hand into the Aegis's neck. Triumph bloomed within her as Lucas's hand emerged with the Aegis's throat in it. The warm feeling was short-lived. A burst of energy flew over her head and crashed into Lucas. His head snapped backward before his body fell to the ground. The sight of that horror and pain forced her to shift back. She screamed in human form as her voice rang raw in the air. Lucas's dead eyes lolled in her direction. She heard another cry as Brona came running across the field. She dropped next to Lucas's body, pulling his head into her lap as she wailed with despair. His head hung limply against her skirt. Dahlia felt a rage she couldn't quite describe. Lucas was her friend, her protector, her packmate. The beast within her demanded blood for the loss of the other wolf. She whirled on Creedon. He held one hand toward the sky, suspending the dogger in midair, the other still pointed at Lucas. The anger within her built, and as it did, her power grew. Dahlia slammed her hand into the ground and an earthquake rumbled around her. The earth shook violently, shedding the footing of collectors and lichens alike. Then came the trees. The earth itself released a cry of agony as thick twisted trunks erupted from the soil, impaling collectors and raising them toward the sky. All around her people screamed. Branches rammed through the hooded figures, hanging their corpses high in the air. Dahlia continued to send power into the ground, not stopping until every last one of them was nothing but a blood-soaked and mangled body in her dark orchard of death. The trees towered above, and blood rained down. But where was Creedon? She looked around, searching for him. The dogger was on its feet once more and engaging with a black wolf. Gideon was there too. He shot her a worried glance. As he ducked and dodged the dark creature, she got to her feet, moving toward her mate, when a cold hand took hold of her by the back of the neck. The scent of Creedon's fettered flesh overwhelmed her. "Alpha!" Creedon yelled. To be heard over the chaos. Gideon's eyes doubled in size. Something cold pressed against Dahlia's stomach. She shifted her gaze down where a glimmering blade lay against her skin. "Anything to say before I kill your spawn and reclaim your mate as my property?" Dahlia's body began to freeze as ice encircled Creedon. He cried out in surprise. Ice? That could only mean one thing. Dahlia raised a torrent of vines from beneath them, willing the tangled web to sever Creedon's hold on her. The thorny greenery plunged through Creedon's hands. He cursed as they were separated, and she rolled away from him. Nova was on her feet now. She still clutched her stomach, but ice bloomed from her fingertips. Dahlia teamed up with her, wrapping Creedon's body in thick, thorny vines. Her desire for bloodlust relished Creedon's cries of pain. Creedon glared, and Dahlia could feel the power and anger spewing out of him. "What a mistake you've made. I'm going to take from you the way you and your pack have taken from me. I'll kill that abomination in your womb and make you and the other celestial my slaves. Believe me, you'll wish I had killed you." Here, Dahlia saw Leah out of the corner of her eye. She had the dogger down on the ground now, but she struggled to keep it subdued. Ice vanished from around. Creedon znova collapsed. Dahlia's own powers waned as her energy began to drain. Creedon laughed as the vines began to slip. "I'm going to chain up your mate and force him to live on all fours like the animal he is. Then I'll destroy the alpha's sister. My men are waiting for me to say the word, and then they'll make her scream as they carve up her pretty face." He made a move to step out of the green mass, but stopped when a tall shape shimmered into existence behind him. Hands wrapped around Creedon's head and then started to twist. Creedon screamed in horror as the man began to rip his head from his body. The bones cracked loudly and wet sounds emanated from the slippery, protruding areas around his spine. Blood poured out of his mouth and his screams became sloshy gurgles. Finally the noises stopped altogether. The moment the head was severed, Dahlia got a look at the killer. Beyond the blood splatter she saw white hair and ever-changing eyes. Lark. She scrambled away from him, confusion clouding her thoughts. Didn't he work for Creedon? Why had he killed him? Screaming pulled her eyes away from Lark and back toward the dogger. It had Leah's wolf by the throat as it raised her into the air. Lark's head whipped toward the sound. He blinked away from the headless corpse of Creedon, reappearing near the dogger. Lark grabbed Leah's wolf, and the two of them, along with the monster, vanished. The world went deathly silent. Few moments later, Leah's wolf blinked back into existence, alone. Gideon knelt next to the wolf, checking on it as Leah's human form reshaped into existence. Aaron ran in to take his place, and Gideon darted toward Dahlia. As soon as he reached her, he removed his shirt, slipping it over her head before pulling her in for an embrace. A horrible sobbing pulled Dahlia's attention behind her. Brona bent over the lifeless body of Lucas. Her tears had soaked his shirt, and her turquoise eyes showed no sign of stopping. Dahlia pushed away from Gideon and knelt beside Lucas. Brona looked up at her through red-rimmed eyes. "Help him," she whispered, her tears continuing to flow. Dahlia placed a soft hand on Brona's shoulder. "He's gone." Brona slapped the hand away. "Help him. I know you can. I know you can bring him back." Dahlia's heart slammed against her ribcage. Please try." Brona sobbed. "Please." Gideon knelt down beside Dahlia. "Can you do it?" Sorrow filled his sapphire eyes. "I can try. I need space." Get Brona. Gideon did. He pulled the mournful woman away from Lucas's corpse and held her tightly. Dahlia took a deep breath. Fear clogged her throat and nerves caused her hands to shake. She placed her fingers on the dead Leakin's chest, calling upon her powers. Vines began to emerge from the ground, wrapping Lucas up. They mummified him, sealing away every bit of his skin and body. No. Brona cried, lunging forward, but Gideon restrained her. Deep green light swirled around the dead man. Dahlia closed her eyes, sending a prayer to the goddess, begging for the life of this man to be restored. What would be the price if the goddess said yes? There was always a price. When the serpentine swirling stopped, Dahlia opened her eyes. What happens now? Asked Gideon, his voice betraying his uncertainty. We wait. Dahlia knew what would come next. If the goddess chose to give Lucas life, flowers would bloom all around him and his life would be restored. If the goddess declined, the entire body would be slowly pulled into the earth, giving Lucas to the mother, entombing him in this very spot forever. Dahlia tried to breathe as she waited, but the silence was suffocating and the pressure threatened to swallow her whole. She imagined a hole opening in the ground, dropping her inside its darkness before closing again. Her lungs burned now. The need for air became desperate. Still she did not breathe. Then came the smallest flicker of movement. One of the vines on top of Lucas's body began to twitch and a small bud emerged. It opened slowly, revealing a tiny white jasmine flower. More buds came forward, each one bursting open as the flowers coated the Leakin's still form. There was movement beneath the vines and a hand thrust through the greenery. Lucas sat up, gasping for air. Dahlia finally allowed herself to suck in air as well. Lucas looked around, a bewildered expression on his face. He clutched at his chest and neck, taking stock of all his body parts. Welcome back. Gideon's voice triggered a monumental cheer from all around. The pack huddled close to them, surrounding the newly revived Leakin with their love. Dahlia took another deep breath in and saw Gideon's face in front of hers. Dahlia. His voice was slow and thick in her ears. She swayed side to side before reaching up to touch his face. Shimmering black crept into the corners of her vision, and as she opened her mouth to speak, the world dropped out. Around Chapter 31. Gideon sat around the conference table chewing over his notes. The events of yesterday were still fresh in his mind. So much had happened in such a short time that he didn't know where to start. He revisited his notes once more before clearing his throat to begin. I want to thank everyone for coming. I know we've all had a stressful few days. I want to start by congratulating our brother Darren on his healthy baby boy. The group let out a round of hollers and congratulations. I promise we will keep this meeting short so that you can get back to Nova. Don't worry, Lori is keeping her company. Darren turned to Lance. Did you know your wife practically forced me to come to this meeting so she could get some time with Nova and the baby? Lance groaned and laid his head on the table. She's baby crazy. Having two pregnant mates around recently did not help. Gideon clapped him on the shoulder. Stay strong, my friend. Moving forward, I'd like to talk about some things that happened yesterday. How's Leah? Aaron interrupted in a cautious voice. She's recovering. You may have noticed that Leah was able to do some special things yesterday, and yes, Leah was a reaper before she came to our pack. That is her story to tell, and she'll do so when she's ready. Speaking of doing special things, Lucas leaned back in his chair, ruffling a hand through his blonde hair. Your mate was able to bring me back from the dead. I feel like that should have been first on the talking points for today. A murmur of agreements ran around the table. Lucas, I can't begin to tell you how grateful we are to have you here with us. There would have been a true hole in this pack if we had lost you for good. Gideon sent a wave of alpha energy toward Lucas, encircling him in love and support. As far as Dahlia, apparently that ability is touch and go. It is not a guarantee, and not everyone can be brought back. It also exerts a massive toll on her. She's been asleep since she blacked out after bringing Lucas back. Gideon had spoken to Lucas as soon as he had been brought back and followed up with him again this morning. The happy and easygoing Leakin insisted he was fine, but Gideon's wolf could sense something swimming beneath the surface. A change in his animal? Pent-up emotions? Horrific memories of the afterlife? Gideon didn't know, and he wasn't going to force Lucas to tell him. But he would keep an extra close eye on Lucas and support him in every way possible. He meant what he said. He was truly grateful that Dahlia had been able to bring Lucas back. He thought about Dahlia asleep and alone. He hadn't wanted to leave for fear she would wake up while he wasn't there. His duties as Alpha had taken him away, but he would return to her side the second he could. Dr. Sawyer had assured him that she and the baby were physically fine, just exhausted and energetically drained. These Celestials are full of surprises, Lance murmured. Aaron slapped a hand on the table. Speaking of Celestials, are we going to talk about that guy showing up, causally ripping off Creedon's head, returning the demon to the veil, and then just disappearing? Why did he turn on Creedon? And why help us get rid of the dogger? And then where the fuck did he go? Gideon had dreaded this part. Memories of Dahlia in Creedon's clutches came painfully to the front of his mind. He gripped the edge of the table so hard it actually cracked. Why had Lark shown up when he did? It didn't escape his notice that it was only after Creedon had mentioned harming Arya.
Gideon's gut
twisted. Lark is an unfolding situation. He did help us out, but he is still to be treated as a threat if he's seen again. Understood? Yes, Alpha, the group replied as one. Do you think those shadow creature sightings Peyton reported are related to the dogger and the veil? Lucas tapped his pen against his chair. Unfortunately, yes. We may encounter those again in the future. This may not be what you want to hear, but I believe it's our job to find them and send them back to the veil. It will be difficult, but the blood will be on our hands if we do nothing. The group stayed quiet as nerves skittered around the room. Seemed no one was too eager to take on a dogger again anytime soon. That sums up our debriefing today. We've all been through a lot. Take the time you need. Everyone get some rest. You've earned it. Gideon hurried through the last of his alpha duties, eager to get back to Dahlia. He was heading down the hall when two approaching figures caught his eye.
Liv
and Abigail walked hand in hand. The two had been smiling, laughing at some private joke. They stopped short when they saw Gideon. Alpha, Liv said and dipped her head. Gideon noticed she no longer wore the excessive perfume that had clouded his senses every time he had encountered her before. She was better suited without it, though he had to admit it had been a clever way to keep him from sensing her true intentions. Ecker's idea. No doubt. How are you two fitting in? Gideon tried to make his voice sound even and
non-threatening.
Liv's soft golden eyes lit up. Great. Lori got an apartment set up for us and stocked it with everything we need. Until we get our things sent over from London. My cousin Estes is taking over as Alpha. He said we can visit the territory whenever we want. The words came out quick and excited. That's wonderful. Are you planning on moving back to the London territories? Gideon was looking back and forth between the two mates. Probably not. Too many bad memories. Liv's gaze lowered to the floor and Abigail pulled her in close. Gideon felt a lump in his throat and knew this was his chance to do the right thing. I want to apologize for the way I treated your brother. No one should have to witness their family member gutted like that. I don't regret taking his life after what he did to my mate, but I do regret that you had to see it. Liv released a heavy sigh. I understand. He was a different person in the end. The brother I grew up with and loved was long gone by the time we came here. Gideon could sense the sadness wafting off of her. She would need time to heal. I meant what I said. You two are as welcome here as much as any of our own. If you truly want to stay, then I look forward to welcoming you both formally during your pack initiation ceremony. If you need anything in the meantime, please let me know. As your new Alpha, I will be here for you in every way I can. Gideon meant every word. Liv had obviously been mistreated by her father. She was so close in age and size to Arya. She deserved a fresh start. Abigail caught him by surprise when she spoke. Thank you for everything you've done for us so far. You're a true Alpha. Thank you. Gideon felt pride at her words. Now get back to your mate. I'll think she'll have something to tell you when you get there. Abigail's ice blue eyes glittered with knowing. Liv let out a giggle, clearly privy to the information Abigail was hinting at. The two women wandered off, leaving Gideon to guess at their cryptic words. He would find out soon enough. His wolf was aching for Dahlia's presence. You and me both, buddy. Let's go see our mate. Dahlia groaned as the sound of a beeping monitor assaulted her ears. She waved a hand to the side in an attempt to silence it. The unit made an impressively loud sound as it crashed to the floor. Dahlia jerked upright, now fully awake. The door opened and Gideon sauntered in, looking as dangerously handsome as ever. His expertly tailored suit clung to his body in the most flattering ways. The deep navy complemented his ocean eyes. He stole a glance toward the broken monitor and then back up at Dahlia. Everything okay? Dahlia shrugged. Monitor tried to start some shit. He glided closer to her. It should know better than to pick a fight with a brand new wolf. Something fragrant and floral tickled her nose. Gideon pulled a hand from behind his back and revealed a stunning bouquet of fresh flowers. The contrast of pink and orange against the deep purple and blues reminded her of a sunset. Are these from the greenhouse? He grinned, placing the bouquet in her arms. You may need to do some mild repairs. I wasn't exactly graceful in my harvesting process. Dahlia envisioned Gideon, his massive hands trying to pluck a delicate flower from its base. She bet he looked like a bull in a china shop. The image made her giggle and Gideon's sapphire eyes sparkled. How are you feeling? He planted a soft kiss on her eagerly waiting lips. Like I just brought someone back from the dead and then slept for a whole day. Her stomach let out a loud protest and she laughed. And hungry. Ravenous actually. You don't happen to have any food hidden behind your back? Do you? Gideon laughed, the sound coming from deep within. Afraid not, but I'll get some food sent up here immediately. He pulled out his phone and typed out a quick message before returning his attention back to her. And how is our little one doing? Good. Growing. My magic can tell that for sure. Are you still worried? He placed a hand across her lower abdomen.
No.
Dr. Sawyer says everything is fine. He thinks carrying a leaking baby is what protected you and part of the reason why you were able to survive the transformation after Harrison bit you. That makes sense. Especially considering I have double protection. A mischievous smile pulled at the corners of Dahlia's lips. Gideon's eyes went wide. Double. Double. She nodded back. As in. Biting her lip, Dahlia nodded once as she gauged his reaction. He put his head to her stomach, listening intently. His eyes lit up the second he identified both heartbeats. Twins. He stared up at her. Twins. He pulled her into him, his lips landing on hers with a searing heat. She could feel the love pouring off of Gideon and it made her heart swell. A knock came from the entrance and Lori poked her head inside. Special delivery. The beautiful blonde ushered an employee inside as he pushed a large dining cart to the side of Dahlia's bed. He removed the silver domes, revealing a smorgasbord of sandwiches, pastries, fruit bowls, and sides. Oh yeah, I'm going to need all of that. Dahlia went for a chicken salad. Croissant. The first bite was heaven to her empty body. She let out a moan. That was damn near sexual. Gideon piled a plate high with the various foods. Dig in. You are eating for 3. 3? You're having twins. Lori spun toward Lance, who had quietly entered the room along with Dr. Sawyer. They're having twins. She threw herself into the beta's arms and gazed up into his eyes.
Lanciged.
Dramatically. Hey doc, any cures for baby fever? My wife seems to think the 2 children we have already aren't enough. Dr. Sawyer gave a low chortle. Sorry beta, I'm afraid you're on your own with that one. Lori grinned up at Lance and Dahlia smiled between bites. She liked watching Lance squirm under his wife's baby-crazed stare. Gideon snatched a sandwich from the tray and tossed it back. Hey, Dahlia pouted. I was going to eat that. Gideon captured her pouty lips in another devastating kiss. Don't worry, you can have all the sandwiches you want now and forever. Just say the word. Anything you want and it's yours. Oh, you mean if I like some little sandwich shop you'll buy it and have them making footlongs in our apartment kitchen? How not weird at all, billionaire lifestyle of you. She walked her fingers up the front of his shirt. Gideon leaned over her, his lips grazing the shell of her ear. The only footlong you'll be getting in our apartment is mine. His breath sent a shiver through her and she dropped the sandwich back onto the plate. In that case, I think I'm hungry for more than just food. Epilogue. The weeks trickled by and life slowly returned to normal. Gideon considered summoning Arya back, but his gut twisted at the thought. There hadn't been a single sighting of Lark since the battle, and it unnerved him. Instead he kept her busy with diplomatic missions overseas. She was pissed, but it was better safe than sorry in this situation. Gideon groaned as he poured yet another cup of coffee. Dahlia had him up most of the night, and he was dragging his way through the morning work routine. Pregnancy hormones were definitely kicking in, and her sex drive was insatiable. Plus, she had recently become a leakin. Her body was going through all sorts of things. Gideon's dick was actually sore. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened. He'd only gotten her to go to sleep after he ordered a dozen cheeseburgers and every flavor of milkshake the local fast food joint had available. She finished the food well past 3 and then promptly passed out. He was dreading the stack of work on his desk that would be staring up at him accusingly. He had been neglecting his alpha duties between several days in the hospital with Dahlia after she was bitten, and the time away after the battle. His work had really piled up. His schedule was backlogged with meetings for weeks. Pain radiated through his skull, and he rubbed his temples to relieve the ache. The apartment was quiet, and Gideon realized he hadn't seen or heard from Dahlia since he had jumped in the shower. The kettle was still hot, which meant she was up and had already made tea, and if she wasn't in the penthouse, he knew where he could find her. The door to the greenhouse was cracked open slightly. Dahlia was dressed in a green and white sundress, resting on a bench he had made for her. She gazed thoughtfully at the wisteria as its blossoms rained down. They continued to fall and piled up on the floor, but the top of the tree never lost its fullness. Sensing his approach, she turned to face him. "Hello, handsome." Dahlia beamed a smile at him, and his heart nearly burst. Her wildflower scent surrounded him, and he felt a pool of contentment settle within. "I'm just having a quiet moment before heading to brunch with Lori and the twins." She rubbed her stomach thoughtfully. "I have some twin questions for them."
Plus I'm starving.
"I could eat the entire Le Crêpe menu right about now." Gideon shook his head, amused. He would need to have the staff stocking his apartment groceries on overtime. "I was also thinking." Dahlia stood and walked across the space, closing the distance between them. "Things have been stressful lately. Your friends could use a release." Her green eyes sparkled with mischief. Gideon sighed, wrapping his hands around her waist and pulling her close. His lips hovered just above hers. "Why do I get the feeling you already have a plan?" She planted a soft kiss on his lips. "We could go to the funhouse. See, I'm sort of sleeping with the owner. He's some crazy hot rich guy, and I bet we could get free drinks all night." Her tongue darted out and swiped up his lips. He growled, and she smirked at him. The scent of her arousal overwhelmed his senses, and his cock sprang to attention. He nuzzled into her neck. "I don't know, I hear that guy can be a real dick. How do you know he'll do what you want?" "I have my ways." She nipped at his bottom lip before dropping to her knees. Gideon groaned in approval as she made quick work of his pants. Her hand stroked him, and his blood rushed beneath her palm. She peered up at him, emerald eyes locking with his before she put his tip between those soft lips. He practically jumped on contact. She slid him deeper into her mouth, and he savored the hot, wet feel of her as she hollowed her cheeks on him. He buried a fist in her hair, pressing her deeper onto him. She jerked back, letting him slip from her mouth with an audible pop. "Don't you dare ruin my hair. Everywhere I go these days I look like I'm rocking the just been fucked look. Clovis much as told me last time I saw her. So mind yourself, sir, or I'll stop." Gideon grinned down at her as wicked thoughts played through his mind. He liked when she walked around looking fucked half to death. Saudi. He gave her an apologetic smirk before moving his hand to the back of her neck. He guided her mouth back to him, and she eagerly took up where she left off. He let her work him with her willing lips, moaning as she teased the pre-cum out of him. Her mouth was heavenly, but her pussy was heaven on earth. He pulled her up, cupping the back of her neck as he drew her toward him. He spoke in a dark whisper before licking the alpha's mark at the base of her throat. "Be a good girl and tell me how you want it." She simpered at his words. Her voice came out low and husky. "Take me under the wisteria." Gideon's blood heated. He slipped the dress over her head and stripped her of her bra and panties, then he lifted her up, wrapping her legs around him. Her Soft lips trailed kisses down his neck as he knelt down beneath the tree. The pile of flowers had grown and he gently laid her in the center. She giggled as she landed in the lavender petal bed. He gazed lovingly down at her. Blossoms landed in her dark hair, making her look like some sort of flower goddess. He supposed she was, in a way. She reminded him of Persephone. She so accurately depicted the duality of both the goddess of spring, making flowers bloom, creating gardens, nurturing those around her, and queen of the underworld, impaling victims on trees, burying them alive, bringing back souls from the brink of death. She truly was magnificent. He dipped his head, sipping at her lips as she wrapped herself around him. I love you, he whispered. Dahlia took his face in both hands, emerald eyes glowing with the power of her wolf. And I love you. He nuzzled into her nape, taking in her sweet scent as he lined himself up with her slick lips. She growled, and it was the sexiest fucking sound as his cock stretched her entrance. His little wolf made him wild with the need to drive in deep, hard and fast, but he held back. She deserved to be savored and worshipped. He moved slowly, reveling in the tight, wet space as her body relaxed to accommodate him. Gideon. The name fell from her lips like rain. He rolled his hips, sinking deeper, deeper. She reached for him, pulling him down into a feverish kiss. The clash of their lips and tongue had his body moving more quickly. They hovered close to each other, the heat from their skin radiating into the space between them. Sliding a hand beneath her, he lifted her hips higher as he drove harder into her. Petals brushed against his knuckles and eventually gave way to the earth beneath as he gave her everything he had. They had fucked plenty of times, but something about this felt intimate in a way it never had before. His lips continued to drink her in as her body pressed up to meet his thrusts. Her breaths were coming in heavy pants as his cock rubbed against her most sensitive areas. Fluttering came from her inner walls, and he knew she would be coming soon, falling apart beneath him. He wanted to push her to pleasure like she'd never experienced, make her tumble over the edge, then catch her as she fell into unfathomable depths of euphoria. Her body quivered and she called out his name over and over again. He gritted his teeth as her muscles tensed around him, driving a wild desire to fill her, breed her, claim her. Primal desperation penetrated his lust-driven thoughts. He sank his teeth into her alpha's mark and she cried out, her body squeezing again in an immediate second orgasm. The intensity of her pleasure stole the last of his restraint as his release barreled through him. He retracted his teeth and buried his face in her neck as her sweet pussy milked him and his cum flooded her. He emptied himself, groaning with relief as he slowed his movements. He was gulping for breath after the intense climax. Dahlia trailed feather-like kisses along his jaw as he regained his composure. I cannot believe I get to experience this forever. She exhaled a contented hum. Her fingertips trailed down his back as he shifted them into a sitting position. She looked at herself in one of the glass windows and sighed. Why do I even bother getting ready? Gideon scoffed. I didn't mess up your hair. She pointed to the flower petals, leaves, and bits of twig. What do you call this? Gideon stifled a laugh. You didn't say anything about not filling you hair with foliage. It's decorative. Maybe it will be the new trend. She shot him a half-hearted glare. So the fun house? Tonight? I miss my friends and I think everyone would have a good time. She was still breathy, and he loved the sound of it. Anything for you. He leaned down to sip at her lips. She squealed before returning his kiss. Thank you, Daddy. Gideon rolled his eyes at the nickname. Shoot, I'm going to be late. She plucked at the greenery in her hair and jumped to her feet. Just before she left, she stopped to blow him a kiss over her shoulder. See you tonight. Dahlia practically ran through the entrance to the club and Gideon felt a hefty amount of guilt that he hadn't brought her to see her friends sooner. The moment she walked inside, it was like she was a celebrity. He recognized Dahlia's friend Christina as she embraced Dahlia tightly. Gideon relished the way Dahlia's eyes lit up as she held her friend. The other girls flocked to her, screaming and hugging before gawking at her ring. It was absurdly large. Gideon liked that too. He wanted everyone to know that she had been claimed. Speaking of claimed, he couldn't help but grin as Dahlia tried to explain her new bite mark tattoos to everyone. The girls stared at the pale yellow scar on her wrist and the silver scar beneath her neck with fascination, and she shot Gideon a thanks-for-nothing look. The dancers practically went feral. When she told them about the babies, they erupted in cheers and appraising glances toward Gideon. More than one asked if he had any available friends. Dahlia introduced him to everyone as things calmed down. He loved the feeling of her soft hand in his. She was wearing a fitted green cocktail dress and her bump was just beginning to show through the tight fabric. The rest of the group followed in after them, taking seats in a large roped-off area in front of the stage. The drinks flowed as the friends began to relax. Gideon spotted Nadia making her way out of the back office and heading toward their table. "Nadia, things are looking good," he greeted her. Nadia was a tough take-no bullshit leak-in. She'd lived through some pretty rough situations before. Finding the pack, it had made her smart, ruthless, and more than capable. When he offered her the position of manager at the funhouse, she jumped at it. "Beating the shit out of drunk guys who get out of line and touch the girls? Sounds like my usual Saturday night, only I'll be getting paid." Gideon had known in that moment he made the right choice. "This is my fiancé, Dahlia." The women shook hands. "You're the new manager?" Dahlia raised a curious eyebrow. Nadia smirked. "Don't worry, sweetheart. The girls are in good hands." Nadia winked at her. Commotion caught her attention somewhere on the other side of the room. Drunk patron had gotten too handsy with a girl and was holding her tightly by the arm. Nadia didn't hesitate. She crossed the space and collared the moron by the back of his neck, lifting him off the ground before slamming him face down onto the sticky floor. She held him there until two security guards took him off her hands. She stood back up and tossed a grin at Gideon. Dahlia's mouth went slack. "I like her," she stated, impressed. Gideon took her hand in his. "I knew you would. She's running a tight ship here and the girls have done nothing but sing her praises. I told you I'd make sure they were taken care of, and I meant it." Dahlia stared dreamily up at him. He leaned down and took her soft, sweet lips in his. "Hey lovebirds, isn't there somewhere private you can take all that lovey-dovey shit?" Aaron was glaring at them in between shots. "Come on now, mate, don't be jealous," Lucas teased him. "Maybe if you buy a few drinks for the dancers you can get one of them drunk enough to kiss your ugly mug." Aaron smacked Lucas with his cowboy hat before launching over the table toward the other man. Leah and Lance shot backward as drinks spilled from the table. Aaron and Lucas tumbled around, drawing a round of gasps from the dancers when Lucas's shirt got ripped open. Lance just shook his head. "We can't take you two anywhere." Leah was the one who eventually grabbed Aaron by the back of the jeans, hauling him to his feet and ending the playful scuffle. Gideon felt Dahlia slide a hand up his thigh under the table. She tilted her lips up to brush across the base of his ear. "There is always the carousel. Sweet. I think you may remember it." Oh, Gideon remembered it all right. His cock could punch a hole in his pants at the memory of Dahlia pleasuring herself while she sucked him off. "I wouldn't mind a refresher." He dipped down to nip at her neck. He froze with his face there as the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Something was off. Dahlia took a sharp breath. She could feel it too. He raised his head slowly, checking in with his pack. Their bodies were tense as they warily glanced around. The air was so thick it pressed in on them. Time seemed to slow for everyone outside Gideon's group. A waitress paused with her body bent forward, a glass of whiskey suspended in the air. On stage, a purple-haired dancer hovered on the pole. Her body hung upside down, one leg outstretched gracefully. Gideon placed a hand protectively over Dahlia's stomach. The lights flickered off in the moment they turned back on. He was standing in front of them. Lark's white hair and pale skin glowed in the dim club lighting. His face was twisted into a mask of hatred and rage. A primeval ferocity roiled in his ever-changing eyes. Gideon shot to his feet, and even that felt like swimming through molasses. It took all his strength just to rise and face him. "Where is she?" Lark's voice was controlled, his words measured, but his chest heaved. "Who?" Gideon sidestepped in front of Dahlia, though he knew her name would not be the one to leave Lark's lips. "Arya," Lark ground out. His hands trembled and his eyes glowed, the colors swirling and switching faster and faster. Gideon's roar shook the club. Why do you need to know where my sister is?" Lark's dangerous stance faltered for a moment before he spoke again. When he Did, his voice was shredded with pain. Because she's my mate. Gas. Resounded from the Ulrich pack. Gideon's stomach dove as he stepped backward. Everything he feared was true. This monster was his sister's mate? He couldn't. Gideon couldn't accept it. Where is she? Lark's tortured words snaked out between gritted teeth. Gideon couldn't find his own voice. Lark lumbered forward like a predator, stalking his prey. He closed the space between the two and a low, slow growl reverberated from his chest. Last chance, Gideon. Now where is she? Sneak peek of Book 3, Leakin and Lark. Arya gasped as her body re-emerged in an unfamiliar place. It was cold here and so dark that even her Leakin eyes had to strain to see. Was she in a cave? Fear spiked adrenaline through her bloodstream. She took a step back and hit something hard. Hard, warm, and very much alive. She spun to find a large, hooded figure. Fuck! Arya sent a punch flying toward the mysterious man. Her fist plowed through empty air and she nearly face-planted. Her Leakin-enhanced speed allowed her to recover just before crash landing. She whirled, trying to figure out where he'd gone. The man was behind her now. Arya charged with skill and ferocity, but her limbs hit vacant space once again. She peeled her lips back, baring teeth and snarling in frustration. Fight me, you fucking coward. Movement to her left caught her attention. She stilled, not giving away the fact that she had located him again. She feigned a dash in the other direction, and then turned, sending a wild roundhouse kick sailing toward him. Frustration quickly turned to shock. Instead of vanishing, the hooded figure caught her around the back of the knee, pulling her forward until her body slammed flush with his. His hand heated her flesh as it remained tightly wrapped around her leg. A wave of dizziness overtook her as the sweet scents of caramel and burnt sugar overwhelmed her senses. Arya could feel the heat of his body through the fabrics between them. She was still wearing her powder blue gown from Darren and Nova's surprise party. The man's warm, large hand had caught her in the dress's high-cut slit. His fingers burned into the bare skin of her thigh. She was frozen, mesmerized by the searing heat of his touch and sugary sweet scents that surrounded him. He towered over her. He must have been close in size to Gideon. His large frame swallowed up the space in the cave. She shifted her thigh in an attempt to wriggle free, but he jerked her forward and she only succeeded in rubbing herself against him. A long, low growl came from beneath his hood. The sound sent desire rushing between her thighs. She swore she heard him scent the air. His grip on her tightened and another husky growl reverberated through her. You're a Leakin? Her voice came out in a breathy whisper. How had her wolf not identified another animal before? She could sense his inner beast now was rising to the surface. The energy that surrounded it was wild and frenzied. She reached a hand up toward his face as curiosity gnawed within her. His hands were quick as he dropped her leg and caught her wrists before she could reach him. Don't, he growled out, and the timbre of his voice awakened something inside her. Show me your face. The words came out soft and shaky. The man remained still and silent. Please, she added, feeling a new level of desperation clawing through her rib cage. She needed to see him. When he continued his wordless torture, she tentatively began to push against his hold, moving her hand closer to his hood. He held her wrists tightly for another moment before slowly loosening his grip. Her hands trembled as they ghosted over the dark fabric. She took a last steadying breath and then pushed the hood back. She released a surprised gasp as the cloth fell away from his face. A shock of pale, snowy hair was styled messily atop his head. Her gaze moved down to his eyes and she became completely transfixed. One eye was soft lavender and the other an emerald green. Wait, one was a deep amber and the other an icy blue. Now they had shifted to a silky brown and a vibrant gold. They continued to change. I was always unique, with the two never matching each other. He had a straight symmetrical nose and sharp, shapely lips. A slight shimmer pulled her gaze to a deep scar that ran from his left temple all the way to the corner of his mouth. What had made such a horrible scar on such a beautiful face? She reached out a hand to touch it, but he flinched away. The movement stung and her wolf growled within. Mine. She gasped and his eyes went wide. Did he know? Had he felt it too? Her heart thundered in her chest. This man couldn't be her mate. He was with Creedon. He was dangerous, evil even. Her wolf paced beneath the surface, scenting the air and taking in the mysterious man's aura. She didn't sense darkness within him. He had none of the telltale signs of the other collectors. His skin wasn't rotted, and his eyes didn't possess that sickly, vacant white. But surely he had done terrible things at Creedon's command. The thought of his past sent a shiver through her. Arya took a step away to put some space between them. His color-changing eyes were trained on her and she wished she knew what he was thinking. Confusion swirled inside her at the overwhelming and highly conflicting feelings within. "What's your name?" she asked hesitantly. The man stood statuesque. The only movement in the dark room came from the colorful glow of his ever-shifting irises. "Lark." The single word rolled out of his mouth and skimmed across her skin. Like a lover's touch. Lark. The name wrapped itself around her heart and blood rushed to her cheeks as her pulse quickened. "And you?" His fierce gaze drove into her. She stared up at him, feeling his presence swarm around her. Why did she find it suddenly so hard to speak? He took a step toward her. Arya's urge to step back was strong, but her feet remained rooted to the floor. He reached out a hand and pushed a strand of her long dark hair out of her face. She sucked in a breath when his fingertips brushed across her cheek. Electricity danced across her skin at his touch. "Tell me." His voice was soft and hypnotic. Her lips finally parted and she gave him a breathy, "Arya." "Arya." The name sent a thrill thrumming through his veins. He hadn't really needed to ask. He had heard the word in her mind the moment he had asked the question, but the way it fell from her lush lips made him groan within. The woman standing before him was the most perfect specimen he had ever laid eyes on. Deep sapphire eyes sparkled curiously up at him. Her skin was smooth and a smattering of freckles dotted her nose and cheeks. A small nose led down to that plump pink mouth. He ached to touch it, to taste it. Arya had deep brown hair that tumbled well past her shoulders. She was small, but he could tell there was strength in her petite, fit frame. Full breasts pressed at the fabric of her dress and led down to a tapered waist. The slit in her dress revealed toned legs. The muscles flexed as she shifted uncomfortably in her heels. His gaze raked over every inch of her, and when his eyes met hers again, there was a rush of blood that colored her cheeks. He knew she was thinking about him. He listened as she wondered what he looked like beneath his cloak. Her mind quickly shifted as she chastised herself for the inappropriate train of thought. He smiled to himself. He wanted to know those things about her too. She noticed the gesture and frowned. "What are you smiling at?" She planted her hands on her hips and glared up at him. His silent observations had clearly made her uncomfortable, and her defenses were up again. He couldn't help it. He wasn't used to conversation. He cleared his throat to speak, but a sharp tingling in the back of his skull told him Creedon was summoning him back. A flicker of fear shot through him. Creedon had sent him to capture Nova, but when he'd sensed Arya's presence, he had gone to her out of instinct. It was a rash decision that he would no doubt suffer for later. "Creedon needs us." He reached out for her and fear filled her blue eyes. "Wait." But he had already made contact with her skin. The cave around them vanished and they reappeared on the fringes of the battle.